Resting in his zero-gravity chair for the last hour, J.T. McMurray was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. His name is Jonathan McMurray, but everyone knows him as J.T. You don't have to ask him what the letter T stands for. He'll just tell you some nonsense he just came up with. If you really need to know, I don't know and I don't care. But he, around age 44, decided he liked the sound of it, so voila, he doesn't have a middle name. But if there was one, it would start with the letter T. JT jolted out of his comfort, if you could call it that, when he heard the beep on his phone indicating an incoming message. The message wasn't actually text, it was just an eggplant emoji. It was a code between husband and wife. His wife Trudy was telling her husband that she and her lover would be home soon. JT's wife is a very fit woman with dirty blonde hair and a figure with legs that lead to a perfect ass. If I tell you who she looks like, I'll probably get sued. And no one wants that to happen, least of all Taylor Swift. Her name is Cassandra, but in her case, she has a middle name, Gertrude. She was named after her aunt, who was married 3 times. With her 39-year-old toned body and 25-year marriage to JT, she's about to have sex with another man for the first time in her life. She does not consider this cheating, because only after pressure from her husband did she agree to this matter. It is important to note that she resisted for over a year. But here we are. It will happen. She finally gave in to her husband's desires. If only she knew all the intrigues in which her husband was involved and all his other affairs. But tonight will be the first time this fire has been lit. Oh yes, everyone at home and at work calls her Trudy. But for this evening, she is Tina. After all, what's in a name if the result is what you always wanted? Beads of sweat suddenly appeared on JT's forehead. His stomach was churning. He couldn't vomit anymore. He had already emptied the wastebasket in his office several times. Why is this happening now? These were endless hours of endless conversations, persuasion, promises, and vows of love for his woman. And now she is going to fulfill his fantasies, his desires and needs. That's what he says. She plans to bring another man into their home and have sex with him in front of her husband. At some point, he convinced her that this is not love. It's just sex. He also told her that it would make their marriage stronger. Lucky guy won't know that it is watching. During those hours of waiting for Trudy's eggplant message, JT had time to look back on the last 2 years. Both he and Trudy had good jobs. He admitted to himself that he was not the best provider for his wife, but they seemed to be happy. He began to think that his sex life with his beautiful Trudy was somehow not as exciting as before. So what? Whose is this? Once the idea settled in his head, it stayed there. Not even DDT could eradicate this weed that had completely taken over his garden and his thoughts. One night at work, he was tired and decided to take a break. It was his break time, so it wasn't a big deal. One of the guys on his team brought one of those dirty magazines from the store. He left it on the table in the break room for anyone who wanted to see it. JT began scrolling through the story headlines. He was intrigued by what he read in this tacky little magazine. Women may not realize it, but men are just as horny as they come. It's not that surprising. Men look at women with dirty thoughts every time they see a woman. The simple truth is that women do the same thing. They don't look at men's breasts. It could be a beard, a tattoo, a guy showing off his muscles. Oh God, I hate to say it, but a man's ass is the source of many nightly fantasies. The truth is that any part of a woman can excite a man if it's something he likes. The same thing happens with a woman. That's how it all began. The beginning of what was to come, the first night of the rest of their lives. It all started when one of the workers left a $6 mini magazine on the table in the restroom. Looking back a few years ago, Trudy was very concerned about the safety or lack of safety of their neighborhood. It wasn't the safest part of town, but it wasn't as bad as she'd imagined. JT first installed a group of 8 security cameras around the house. He installed them with the help of a good friend of his, which suited Trudy just fine. Recently, he came up with the idea of installing cameras inside the house. This time, he did it on his own. JT watched the first installation carefully, and was confident that he could do the job himself. Trudy wasn't sure she wanted to be on camera inside her home, but once they were set up, she was okay with it. After a week or two, she didn't even remember they were there, watching her every move. JT never mentioned them, and she never asked. The external cameras, the first to be installed, switched between high-resolution color cameras during the day and a black and white night mode. However, the internal cameras were first class, with low-lighting 4-kilopixel cameras, and they could see and identify the fly bothering the dog if they had a dog. JT was so proud of his efforts to connect the entire house. One chamber covered the open living room and main entrance to the house. One cell covered the corridor where there were 3 bedrooms. One camera for each bathroom. There were 2 of them. One camera above the fireplace with a sofa in the center of the view and 3 in the bedroom. Yes, that's right. 3 cameras are at the center of all the action in the master bedroom. One to span the side of the bed, one on top and one on the bottom of the king bed. If anyone left the bedroom through the sliding glass doors, they were in full view of the automatic lights and cameras on the party. There were 2 32-inch monitors in JT's cave. Each of them processed 8 cameras. The newer cameras operated on a touch screen, but JT's older cameras had to use a mouse to switch from one camera to another. Over time, as money became available, JT added sound to his system. He eventually installed microphones hidden in table lamps in the living room and hidden in 2 lamps next to the bed in the master bedroom. The kit JT bought came with 6 microphones, so he set one up at the party and kept the other as a backup in case one of them failed. He didn't expect the microphone at the party to last long since it was outdoors. Now you're wondering why all this scam is going on with JT Truddy and JT. JT spent so much time fantasizing about trying hard with another man that was pushing her away from what he was really supposed to do, make their lives more exciting. Instead, he pushed her into another man's arms simply because he read about someone's fantasy in a magazine. Suddenly, the driveway light came on and JT saw a large black or dark green SUV pull over. He clearly saw his wife and her companion talking. Trudy leaned over the center console to kiss the driver. JT's empty stomach clenched, but there was nothing to vomit. He turned away from the screen and began repeating over and over, "What have I done? Oh God, what have I done?" This was Trudy's show now, and JT knew he couldn't stop what was happening. The pain was turning into delight. The remorse for what he had done and what he had forced his beautiful wife to do must have filled him with shame. But there was no shame, only the desire to grab her body from that bed and take her back to himself. He wanted to shout to everyone who would listen that she, this woman, his wife, this beautiful angel of trust and love, belonged to him forever. Isn't this the most unforgivable thing a man can do to the woman he loves? Fortunately or not, the shame passed. When JT gathered his courage and walked into the master bedroom, he found his wife sitting on the edge of the bed, her eyes wet with tears. They hugged and both knew without a doubt that everything would be fine, if only this were true. Strangely, there was no talk about what happened. JT finally got up the courage to watch the entire recording from start to finish. He didn't need another playtime for over a month. It became clear that it was the one pulling the strings. Trudy was not happy about this. At this point, Trudy began to perceive things differently than her husband. JT was happy, but when Trudy reflected on her feelings and her life after that night, she felt like she had somehow been left behind. Why did she feel used? JT made her feel like an actress. She didn't like speaking in public, even in front of her husband. But when it suggested having another game night, she became less and less interested. Moreover, she was disappointed with the performances of her partygoers. She compared them to that first night, and they fell short. There was one important condition that Trudy insisted on complying with. She would never bring a man back to their home. This was her home. Trudy told her husband that she would play his game, but he would have to rely on her stories about his adventures. JT will have to use his imagination to fuel his fantasies. Now Trudy suddenly took control. She was determined to make it a reality, and it turned out to be easier than she could have hoped. Trudy now held all the cards, and her husband had no choice but to accept it. One afternoon at work, Trudy noticed the figure of a man walking past her cubicle. He was more than familiar. He was the same man she met at the club that first night. He was the one who brought her home and did more than just have sex with her. He rewrote the code in her brain that controls her sex drive. He was the man who made her feel like a real woman again, and not just something. Oh shit, she thought. Who is this guy, and should I hide from him? Betty, she said to her cubicle mate. See that guy, pointing to the tall figure of a man standing at the office window. Betty, her friend for as long as Trudy had worked in this building, stood up and looked where her friend was pointing. Oh yes, this is Carson Wilding. He's a big boss from New York. Betty paused for a moment and looked back at Trudy. You haven't met him? Finding herself in an awkward situation, Trudy began to stutter and told her friend that she was not dating him. I think I need to leave early today. Trudy thought for a moment about what she needed to do. After thinking about the situation, she decided to leave. Tell Mike or Phillies that I'm not feeling well and need to go home, okay? Betty looked at the man who was now walking towards the two women. Well, if you're going to leave, you better hurry. Betty nodded her head towards the man heading towards them to warn Trudy. I don't know what scared you so much, but you better hurry before he gets there. Betty demanded a promise of information from Trudy as she headed towards the elevator. When the elevator doors opened, Trudy had to step back to let people exit. She walked inside, and the door closed behind her. When she reached for the lobby button, the same man she knew as Alan stood in front of her. He gently placed his hand over hers as they pressed the button leading to the lobby together. Alan, or whatever his real name was, smiled but said nothing. Luckily for Trudy, there were 3 other people in the elevator. She looked at him, and he looked back at her with a knowing smile. There was no doubt on the man's face. He didn't take his eyes off Trudy. No words were needed as the elevator quickly descended to the first floor. But it's not that simple. The elevator stopped at every floor where someone was waiting. At this time of day, hundreds of people used the elevators. On one floor, more people entered and a few exited. Some recognized the man in the expensive suit, but only 1 or 2 people dared to start a conversation with him. Trudy was relieved when the elevator doors opened on the first floor, but as she stepped out, she felt a hand on her shoulder. Tina, the man's strong voice cut into her mind. Trudy walked away from the elevator and stood next to the wall. She looked him in the face and, hesitating, replied, No, I'm Trudy. And I see you are married. Her left hand suddenly became heavy. She raised it, as if confessing to the priest, and said, Yes, I am married. Well, then you won't mind if you and I talk a little, Tina or Trudy or whoever you are now. Trudy tried to object to his proposal. Don't worry, your job will be waiting for you tomorrow. Handsome Carson Wilding put his hand on her back and led her out of the building. There was a limo waiting there, but he motioned for the driver to leave. Okay, now I know you're married, and it's only fair to admit that I'm married too. He smiled. But thanks to you, I will soon get divorced. Because of me, I didn't even see you. Trudy was scared and very confused about what was happening. Do I need to scream and call the police? Carson Wilding removed his hand from her back and said, Mrs. McMurray, there are thousands of people here within a 25-foot radius. Do you really think I'm stupid enough to hurt you in front of all these witnesses? They headed to a tiny cafe across a large plaza in the business district. Don't look so scared. I'm not going to do anything but talk. Trudy looked around with a nervous look on her face, but no one seemed to notice them passing by. What do you want to talk about? Trudy asked. Looking straight into her eyes, he asked, Am I being set up? Framed? What do you mean? Why did you set it up? Carson Wilding had no reason to believe Trudy, but he had the advantage, so he had to insist on his own. Were you paid to frame me? Frame it so my wife can fleece me in a divorce? What? No, I didn't do anything like that. In fact, if I told you how it all happened, you would have held my hand while we jumped off the bridge together. Trudy's face showed her protest. I just wanted someone to make me feel like a woman again. In fact, I was just looking for a man who would make me feel like a woman again, and you did it. Completely. You won't believe me when I say this, but last year when I met you at the club. By the way, how did you even get into this club? Should this be for club members only? Carson began to wander off topic. Whatever. He paused for a few seconds, wondering if he should tell this woman his story. Okay, I'll tell you the whole story. The waitress at the cafe interrupted his confession and brought them their drinks. Everything is fine? She asked Trudy. Yes, everything is fine. As she spoke, Trudy saw the relief on Carson's face. Trudy took her drink, smiled at the waitress, and took a sip to confirm that everything was fine. Go on, you were going to tell me something, Trudy said. When the waitress was far enough away, Carson began his story. About a year and a half ago, my wife started accusing me of cheating. He raised his finger in the air as if making an important point. I didn't cheat. The truth is, I was too busy saving the company we both work for. Basically, she said I was cheating with someone, and that's what she needed to get out of our prenup. It practically will bankrupt me, and she will stay with everything. 4 generations of hard work down the drain. It's all going to go to a piece of decoration that has no idea how to run this company. What does all this have to do with me? And who in their right mind signs a marriage contract that leaves them destitute? Trudy asked, trying to relieve the tension from herself. You, my dear, appeared on the internet about 6 months ago, and my wife claims that the ass bouncing on you belongs to me. Well, is that so? Yes, but you're the only one I've been in bed with this whole time, including the number of times I was with my wife. Carson Wilding was now pleading with Trudy. Trudy sat up straight. Wait a minute. Are you saying the video is on the internet? Yes, there is such a thing. With both of us, Trudy didn't know whether to be afraid or threaten someone with death. Carson Wilding now acted like a supplicant. My wife's lawyer showed me this video 6 months ago, and I've been looking for you ever since. If there is this small piece of video, then there must be even more. If she gets her hands on it, I'm lost. Trudy was silent. She looked around with an expression on her face that she was ready to kill someone. Or something. She saw the despair on Carson's face. She then grinned and spoke in a calm and confident tone that Carson had never seen. I'll break that bastard's neck. Please tell me you know where the rest of this video is, but first, how the hell was it recorded in the first place? An astute person could see the steam coming from Trudy. We'll need help. Carson, waiting for Trudy to say or do something, looked at the angry woman and said, You mean you know where that video came from? Yeah, and we're going to need help pinning that bastard to the cross. Wait, I need to get this video first. You can do whatever you want, but I need this video first. Carson pleaded, trying his best to avoid disaster for himself. Trudy, if that's your real name, do you know where that video is? It's on my husband's computer at home, Trudy replied matter-of-factly. You're right, we're going to need help. What do you mean? Your husband has a video, right? That's right. She nodded. Then it's also in the cloud, Carson said. Trudy smiled. I set up his cloud account. I know the password. Carson grabbed Trudy's face with his hands and kissed her on the lips. I'll probably just get you a promotion for this. I don't know about the promotion, but you made me worry, she laughed. What will we do next? Carson was ready to go right away. Wait a minute. He's on the day shift this week. That means he'll be home for about 5 o'clock. This is more than enough, Carson began to plead again. By the time we get to the house and find the video, it could be several hours. An irritated Carson said, Well, what do you think we should do? Trudy glanced at her watch. Do you have a couple of people you can trust? Of course, my sister and her husband live here. I'm sure they will help. Carson started looking through the contact list on his phone. Don't you have your sister's number on the speed dial? You would understand if you knew my sister, but she won't let me down. In the end, it concerns her too. Carson found the number and leaned back in his cafe chair with a satisfied look on his face. After about 30 minutes, Carson and Trudy's phone had already clearly developed a plan of action, at least when it came to getting the entire recording made on that first night a year ago. The next move was up to Trudy. She waited until she knew it, her husband would be on his lunch break. She called, and, to her surprise, he answered immediately. "What happened, Trudy?" was the greeting his wife heard. "I need to ask you something." "Yes, go ahead, honey." JT was such a witty conversationalist. "I met a guy I was with before, and he wants to take me somewhere after work. I'll probably stay until late at night." There was silence between them on the phone for a few seconds. "Who is this guy?" His name was Paul. "You remember, he was the one who took me to that hotel downtown and had sex on the balcony. Can you take photos with your phone this time?" "Oh, honey, I already asked him. He said I could use my phone to take videos as long as we didn't show his face." "Will you really do this for me, Trudy? Are you really going to do this?" The excitement in JT's voice grew. Trudy then asked, "So, can I spend some time with someone else tonight?" JT had already started breathing harder, so loud that Trudy could hear it through the phone. "Be careful, darling." That was all he said. Trudy now looked at the phone as if it were a piece of garbage that she wanted to throw in the trash. "This bastard." "Don't get too mad. You know we need to focus on getting that video," Carson said, trying to calm Trudy down. Later that day, Trudy met Carson's sister and her husband. A detailed plan was developed to ensure they had enough time to retrieve the files from JT's cloud storage. Carson quickly pointed out the need to change the password for added security. Then Trudy came up with another idea. "Let's give him the password to my account." "We don't have much time," Carson countered. "I would love to see the look on his face when he opens his dirty videos and finds my training videos." David, Carson's sister's husband, intervened. "Guys, this is not just changing passwords. This will slow him down, but everything you do on his computer will remain on his computer." David looked at his accomplices. Computers are actually very lazy. To work faster, they simply write the changes to the same disk and move the rest of the data. But they're still there, so if someone knows how to find the changes, they'll just spend a little or a lot of time trying to find what you did. The computer knows it's there. It's just a matter of time before it's found. Like a schoolgirl, Trudy raised her hand. "How long will this take?" "First of all, who has a credit card?" asked David. "We need to start now." They started really quickly. Within 30 minutes, everyone had their tasks. Trudy and Carson went in one direction, and David and his wife got on a motorcycle and left too. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, everyone was eating their food, while David and Carson Wilding were hard at work preparing for the next day. When everything was ready, except for the algorithm David was working on, Carson and Trudy went out onto the balcony to get some fresh air. "So, your husband likes to watch you with other men?" Carson asked after spending most of the day with Trudy. "Yes, you can say so. He's not such a bad person. He just has this one quirk that I can't figure out." Everything was going well. Don't get me wrong, we had our problems, but he took it in his head, and I would never hear the end of it until I agreed to do it for him. I thought I loved him enough that I could do this, and that would be the end of it. But the first man was you, and you were damn good. "Well, I'm glad I'm at least good at something." Carson smiled and raised his glass to acknowledge Trudy's confession. Trudy raised her glass to confirm her comment. But it didn't last long, at least for me. I'm embarrassed to admit, but I slept with 4 different men in the first 4 or 5 months, but none of them came close to that first night with you. They raised their glasses again. Since I didn't let him watch, I started making up all sorts of stories. I almost fell for it because he said I didn't smell right. "What have you done?" Carson asked interestedly. I told him that I had to brush my teeth. But apparently the smell from the toilet at the gas station where I washed my face did its job. So you're not. Hell no, Trudy exclaimed. I was sitting in a burger shop half an hour from home. They both smiled at each other. There was a silent connection between them. Carson spoke first. Now I have the urge to grab you and love you all night. And I have a desire to let you do this, but we can't. Trudy moved away from him a little. Carson, I admit that the night we were together was a very memorable one in my life. But I can't be the one to ruin your marriage. This is hard for me to accept. Truth be told, we'll probably both get divorced, but we can't let our desires ruin our lives completely. I don't understand. You admitted that you had sex with other men, Carson pleaded. Yes, but they were nothing. As far as I knew, they were single or even divorced. As long as I didn't ask, and they didn't say, it was fine. It was acceptable, even when I was pretending to be with someone. Trudy made it clear that she did not want to continue with her confessions. She got up from her chair on the balcony. Sorry, but I need to rest. It's been a busy day. She went into the second bedroom in Carson's suite and lay down on the bed. The only things she took off were her shoes. A few seconds later, she was already asleep. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, Carson's sister's husband gently woke Trudy up. Time to go home, miss. Trudy was pleasantly surprised to find Carson lying next to her, his face buried in her shoulder. How long has he been here? She asked. He came right after you, David replied. Trudy smiled and thought how close she was to letting him love her for the second time in her life. Would it be as wonderful as the first time? Will he continue to haunt her dreams? Could it have been better? Can she risk being disappointed? Trudy looked at her watch and realized that there was no time. She had to leave now. See you in the morning. I'd better go. Matthew is waiting for you in the car in front of the building, David said. Trudy looked surprised. Who is Matthew? Carson's driver, David answered, opening the door for Trudy. There was sadness on her face as she left. She turned to look at Carson, who was still sleeping on the bed. She smiled. She took the keys from Matthew, Carson's driver, and after giving him a smile, she began the short drive home. All the time on the way home, she mentally played out the plan for the next day. The first thing she had to do was get home and get into bed without waking JT. If she can complete this small task, the rest will be easy, or at least that's what she thought. Trudy decided to take a chance and park in the garage. If closing the garage door doesn't wake up JT, then everything is fine. Sneaking into the bedroom without shoes, she found it still sleeping. She knew he was fantasizing about what she might do that night. After a grin, full of disgust, Trudy undressed and crawled under the blanket and coverlet. She made sure that she did not touch her husband and gave no sign that she had returned from her night of false escapades. Sleep did not come that night. In fact, she only had 3 hours to sleep because she had several things to do. First, don't let JT have sex with her before work. Second, complete your 2 tasks without errors. This was a big task for Trudy. Trudy has thought a lot about her life in recent months, wondering how she ended up in this situation. It was easy to blame JT, but she felt that a lot of the blame lay with her as well. She stood at a crossroads. If she follows one path, she will be stuck in the same life as now. But the other path felt more like an option than a choice. It was new, perhaps full of dangers she had never encountered. Then her wandering thoughts calmed and her eyes closed in sleep. JT tried to wake Trudy up in the morning, but she pretended to be too tired for lovemaking and pushed him away. We can do this when you get home from work, she said, pulling the blanket over her head. She lay still in bed until she heard the garage door close as it drove away. Wait, she thought. He must be completely gone. They must make sure he doesn't come back. At this point, JT was being followed by Carson's sister on her husband's motorcycle. Her phone rang. She answered quickly. He's gone, Trudy. It's all up to you now. The voice on the phone belonged to David, Carson's sister's husband. Trudy jumped out of bed and put on sweatpants and a top. She ran down the hall to the kitchen and opened the door to the basement. At the bottom of the stairs, there was a panel with machine guns. David, David, she screamed his name into the phone. There's a lock on the electrical box. Is this a combination lock or a keyed lock? David asked calmly. It seems like both. Trudy replied. Both. Yes, there is a code disc on the front side and a place for the key in the back. Don't do anything. I'll be there in a minute. Trudy stopped. Damn. I had 2 tasks and I screwed up both of them. She ran up the stairs and down the hallway to open the back door for David, Carson, and some guy she hadn't seen before. As Carson walked into the house, Trudy motioned to him, with her shoulders raised and her arms spread, who this new guy was. Carson shook his head and said, "Don't ask." 4 of them hurried to the shield with machine guns, and a few minutes later the shield door was open, and the machines responsible for the computer and cameras were turned off. For the next 4 hours, David, and this guy David called Disco, worked hard for 10 minutes at a time, then sat and stared at the 3 screens set up on the desk in JT's office. After Trudy asked David what she and Carson could do, Disco suggested they find something to eat. There was also a request for beer, just for the mood. Now Carson and Trudy had a task. They willingly left the 2 technicians alone. When Trudy and Carson returned, the 2 men greeted them happily, sitting in their static positions and waiting for lunch. David spoke up eagerly, "You 2 know the cameras are still connected and working." As he spoke, David and his friend began to laugh. "I'm not sure I trust these sandwiches." More laughter. "Normally I would tell you to get a room, but you've already done that deed." Carson and Trudy exchanged emotionless glances, and then suddenly they both started laughing. Suddenly, a strange expression appeared on Carson's face. "I thought we turned off all the cameras." "We turned it off," David replied. "But we turned them back on after redirecting the video to our new system. That means you guys trashed the kitchen on live TV." David had a hard time holding back his laughter to give Carson a serious answer. "You know, brother, you're doing a good job with this matter. I can't understand why your old one wants to get rid of you." One word, David. One word, money. Trudy just smiled and left the room, leaving the men to their fun. The laughter was interrupted by the phone ringing. It was Carson's sister. "Is your husband coming home for lunch?" "No, why do you ask?" Trudy answered. "Well, he just got out, got in the car, and drove back to the house." Trudy was confused. "He has been working at this plant since he left school. He never comes home for lunch. One time he was late, and I offered to bring him something later. He said there was no need. He would take lunch from the vending machines." Trudy paused. "Besides, he always takes lunch with him." Carson's sister said, "Wait a minute. He turned down another street. I will follow him and return to you. I think we're safe for now." Trudy walked into JT's office, which she called his cave, and reported a phone call from Carson's sister. "By the way, Carson, what's your sister's name?" Trudy asked. Carson simply smiled and pointed at his brother-in-law. David hesitated a bit. "Well, it depends on the day of the week." "What?" Trudy asked. "Yes, my wife is one of those who believes in conspiracy theories. You know, with space lasers and sterilization through drinking water." David almost looked sad as he made this admission. "She changes her name depending on the day of the week and what she dreams that night." Trudy was intrigued. "What do you call her?" "Hey," David said. "Hey, you look great today." "Hey, where are my pants?" "Hey, what's on TV tonight?" "Wait, I'm not allowed to talk about TV, but you understand." Trudy turned and looked at Carson. "You know, I'm starting to reconsider my opinion of you and your family." Carson smiled. "You can't help it. She can be both smart and stupid in one sentence. But she's my sister, and I love her." Carson paused, "But not as much as David." David agreed and turned back to the computer screens. There were a few hard drive exchanges, and then came the main test. Disco said, "Well, that's it," and pressed the Enter key on JT's computer, and it was done. He checked to make sure all the correct changes were accepted by the new hard drive, and then it was time to leave. Carson couldn't thank everyone enough, but he joked with Trudy that she wouldn't get paid for missing work today. Her response was a quick punch to his shoulder. He quickly went back on his words and received a quick kiss from her as a sign of forgiveness. Just David and Disco were heading to their vehicles when Trudy's phone rang again. "Hey, what happened? We were just about to call you." "Do you want to know where your husband eats lunch?" Carson's sister asked. With a puzzled look on her face and Carson holding her hand, Trudy replied, "Yes, of course I do." "You know that Shell gas station on Maple Avenue?" Trudy smiled. "This is where it fixes the car." "That's not the only thing he fixes there." Trudy was puzzled again. "What do you mean?" "I parked at the motel across the street. If you're interested, come here and bring your camera." Trudy was stunned as she stood in the middle of the group with her phone on speaker. Everyone heard David's wife's comments. "See you in a few minutes, sister. We're on our way." Carson directed everyone to his SUV, parked 2 houses away in front of an empty lot. It was a large, dark green SUV, the same one that Carson drove Trudy home the first night she became a hot wife. Not long later, they parked in a motel parking lot. Trudy looked around and saw her husband's car. "Where is he?" she asked David's wife. "Follow me." She led them to an abandoned building next to a gas station. They walked through the broken door. "You guys sound like a herd of buffalo. Can you be quieter?" Dust filled the air from the long, vacant building, but none of those walking along these steps was going to stop. David's wife aroused everyone's curiosity, and no one wanted to back down. When they climbed to the second floor, there was a direct vision into the neighboring building. There was an apartment above a Shell gas station. Looking through a hole in the boards covering the window, they could see the living room of the apartment above the gas station. Just a few feet away, there was a naked couple sitting on the couch. As the man moved away from the other man, Trudy saw her husband. David's wife said, "Don't move yet, there's more to come." A few seconds later, another naked woman sat between the 2 men. Trudy gasped in surprise. That's not all. And then 2 more beautiful young women joined the company. "That's it," said David's wife. "Now it's the whole company." David and Disco took pictures as quickly as possible. "I need to get this on video," Trudy said angrily. "Don't worry about the photos, I have plenty of them, and videos too." Carson wrapped his arms around Trudy and held her in his arms. "Don't worry, honey, we'll figure it out." Trudy broke free of Carson's embrace and ran down the stairs to the street. Carson followed her, trying to hug her and calm her down. "You got what you wanted. Now what do I have? I have a reputation as a woman of easy virtue throughout the internet and a husband with whom I would not sleep even for a lot of money." Carson held her hands and looked into her eyes with a smile. "First of all, my sister has a name. Her name is Helen. She doesn't like it, but there's nothing she can do about it. Secondly, do you want me around, or are you just playing with me? Because if you want me to leave you alone to fight your battles, darling, I will leave. I'll leave you right here, standing under the street lamp." Trudy burst into tears in Carson's arms. David, his wife, and Disco walked out of the broken door into the street. "You guys can make up whenever you want. The gang is getting dressed, and soon they'll be here figuring out why their cars won't start." "You didn't do it?" David asked his wife. "This is fixable. And besides, they're parked in front of a gas station," Helen replied with a big smile. A second later, 4 laughing people were driving further down the street towards the city center. Trudy laughed through her tears. She felt better sitting next to Carson and placing her hand on his arm. Helen, sitting next to her husband in the back, put her hand on Trudy's arm. "I hope you can sort this out," she said. "My brother isn't so bad if you can handle his antics." She clapped again. "Try hard by hand. You know, you're not the only hot wife in this car." Trudy turned her head sharply to Helen. "What do you mean?" "David and I have fun sometimes," she smiled, looking at her husband, who had already fallen asleep next to him. You know, too many drinks at a friend's party late at night. It happens. Trudy looked at Carson. Oh, girl, don't look at him. He is as guilty as I am. Where do you think he met that bitch who is trying to fleece him? Trudy turned to Carson. Is it true? This is true? Carson glanced at Trudy. If I lie to you now, you can never trust me. So yes, it's true. My ex-wife and I were at a party and everything started to spiral, and before I knew it, I found myself in a night I wish I could remember. How many ex-wives do you have, mister? Trudy was starting to get angry and used again. She let go of Carson's hand and sat up straight. Jesus, Carson, this is an easy question. Let's try again. How many wives did you promise to love? 1. No, we can immediately discard this. 2. She watched him ponder the answer. Oh, hell, don't tell me it's more than 2. No, hell no. Just 1 ex-wife. But I promise this will be the last. Oh, damn. I guess you think I want to be 3rd. Carson stopped the car and looked straight into Trudy's face. I expect nothing more than for you to be last. The car was silent until they reached Carson's hotel. David and Helen had a car in the hotel garage, so they left after thanking Carson and Trudy and hugging them. When the couple entered the room Carson shouted Trudy, asking if she wanted to order room service. Having received no answer, he tried to open the bedroom door. It was locked. I'll go take a shower and change clothes. If you want to have dinner, I'll wait. If not, I'll order something upstairs. He decided to give her time to think it over, so he went out to dinner alone. When he returned to the room, the unpacked tray was standing in the hallway in front of the door. The next morning, Carson's driver took him to his car at the airfield. Soon he was heading back home to New York. During the flight, Carson received a call from his lawyer requesting a meeting upon his arrival in the city. There was good news. However, despite this, Carson's mood remained gloomy. Upon arrival, Carson was greeted by his lawyer, accountant, and the head of the private investigation agency he had hired 2 months earlier. Their task was to find out the reasons for the divorce, which, as he knew, threatened him with financial ruin. Samuel James, the lead investigator on the case, spoke first. Mr. Pitts-Wilding, you are a very lucky man. And by the way, I don't blame you for signing this prenup. This is one damn attractive woman. You were doomed from the start. I'm glad you appreciated my taste in women, but what did you learn? Carson asked irritably, not wanting to drag out the conversation. The man your wife was with at the party, the one everyone thought was her husband. Surprise, surprise, it's her father. What? Carson almost screamed. What the heck? And this is just the beginning. Adorable Father Ben Golden's brother. Why the hell was I such an idiot? Carson turned his chair so as not to look at the faces of those present. I had to be the mind that holds it all together. Don't say that, Carson, the lawyer intervened. We found an even bigger asshole. When you went on a business trip, your wife found our boyfriend and spent a week with him in a rented house on the beach. Is this acceptable? Carson asked. Yeah, when you factor in all the illegal substances they claim they gave you. Son, that's why I don't remember anything about that night. Carson paused to collect his thoughts. I called it a night I wish I could remember. Based on what we've gathered, which is a lot, Carson's lawyer said, we can schedule a meeting with her lawyers on Monday, a week at the most. They will think we want to negotiate an agreement. I'm sure they will happily agree to this. The discussion continued until sunset. But before everyone left, Carson received promises from everyone that they would help Trudy get out of her situation. When the office was empty, Carson called his sister Helen. Do you have Trudy's phone number? Yes, do you need him? Helen answered. Talk to Trudy for me. See if she's ready to talk to me. What should I say other than for her to talk to you? Helen, let her know we're not all crazy. I know she feels that way, and I just want her to be able to understand that some of the things we do are just for fun. Helen called Trudy and told her what was happening. Unfortunately, Try Hard never called Carson back. JT quickly realized that he had lost all of his video and audio files. It didn't take a rocket scientist to figure out who took the files. Trudy did not return home that night. She simply left a note on his desk, politely asking him to go into the woods. She made it clear that she knew about his infidelities, but she no longer cared. Carson Wilding's group helped Trudy by providing her with all the legal help she needed to fully free herself from JT. When the time came for the trial, JT still showed up to justify himself or something like that. In the back of the courtroom was a familiar man, Carson Wilding. Trudy smiled at Carson, but that was all she could manage until the judge finally declared her a free woman, no longer associated with JT McMurray. When Trudy looked to the back of the courtroom, Carson was not there. However, there were a few familiar faces there, Helen and David, Carson's sister and brother-in-law. There were greetings and hugs, laughing and reminiscing. Laughing and reminiscing, they walked down the stairs to the street exit. On the street, Trudy saw Matthew, Carson's driver, holding the limousine door. Helen nudged Trudy on the shoulder and said, "Get in that car. This person loves you and doesn't try to ruin everything." Trudy smiled and could barely contain herself as she walked down the final steps of the court, turning around and smiling at her friends before disappearing from sight. Trudy and Carson lived happily ever after. That night, Trudy learned that as Carson sat in the back of the courtroom, he remembered where he had seen JT, and JT recognized Carson too. JT was the host of the wife-swapping party where Carson fell into his trap. It is unlikely that any of them knew that this would be the day or night that would end one life and be the beginning of a new and better life.